Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Conservative Friends of CANZUK lecture in 2025. We are so honoured to be welcoming Lord Roberts here today to deliver the inaugural Conservative Friends of CANZUK lecture, and we are so blessed to have you here today, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation with such grace. And we obviously had such the pleasure of welcoming Lord Roberts to our launch in Parliament earlier this year, and we all know how much Lord Roberts is as a CANZUK advocate, as an Atlanticist, as an esteemed historian, as a Conservative, and so many other hats. So we look forward to hearing your lecture tonight. So I do have some apologies from Lord Johnson, who is the co-chairman of the Conservative Party. So due to personal reasons, he cannot be here today, but he sends his well wishes. And it's so welcome to hear from Lord Johnson of his support for CANZUK and for the movement. So it's really wonderful to hear. So before I pass on to our wonderful Vice President, Andrew Rosendale, who will be welcoming Lord Roberts, apologies. We will be hearing a bit about that in a moment, but CANZUK is three pillars. It is economics, it is security, it is culture. Closer economic ties, closer security ties in a volatile world, with an increasingly isolationist America, with Russian and Chinese threats on the horizon. We need to unite as an Anglosphere, and especially the CANZUK nations. For culture, common law, parliamentarianism, democracy. These are all the shared values we all share here tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our Vice President of Conservative Friends of CANZUK, Andrew Rosendale. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, David. I think you've already introduced Lord Roberts, actually, so I don't really need to introduce him again. But what I would like to say is this. CANZUK has been a long time coming, but I think its time has well and truly come. Just as our membership of the EU has well and truly gone, we must now become a global free trading nation. And let's start with the closest cooperation with our nearest and dearest friends in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, because, as David has said, we share so much. We are one family, in fact. The king, our king, is their king. They have a constitution based on ours, their legal system, their trading, free trading attitude is the same as ours. And our culture, our language, and our way of life could not be more similar than those three countries that are proud Commonwealth realms. So the Conservative Party, and we are the Conservative Friends of CANZUK, the Conservative Party needs to start being a little bit more radical, adopting policies that are going to restore our base back to being what the Conservative Party should have always been, and that is a party that believes in global free trade, not protectionism. A party that believes in working with countries with whom we have most in common. And the Conservative Friends of CANZUK, their entire purpose is to start that with our friends in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. There could be no better person than Lord Roberts of Belgravia to inaugurate this first lecture for the Conservative Friends of CANZUK, and it's my pleasure to invite him to address us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Roberts of Belgravia.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honour to be invited to address you, and thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for those very kind words. I may not do it, may not, President Trump said yesterday on the lawn of the White House. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. It's unclear whether he included himself in that remark. There, in a nutshell, is the case for CANZUK. Trump's insulting remarks about Canada and Canadian sovereignty, for which Keir Starmer should not have rewarded him with a state visit, also underline why we need CANZUK. His unreliability over the AUKUS deal further underlines his chronic unpredictability. By the way, America invaded Canada twice, in 1775 and the War of 1812, and they were chased out both times. The day of small nations has passed away, Joseph Chamberlain said in Birmingham. There he is up on the wall there. A great man, not a conservative actually, extraordinary that, and impressive that he's in the Carlton Club, owing to the fact that he was a liberal unionist all his life. But he was a visionary when it came to the Federation of the English-speaking peoples. And he said, the day of small nations has passed away. This was in May 1904. The day of empires has come. And what we are not talking about is, of course, empires. What we are talking about is the federation of willing peoples. And with the United States, China, and the European Union all essentially turning into forms of empires, the time now has come for our own Anglo-Federation. CANZUK would have a combined GDP of $8 trillion, trade of 4.5 trillion, an economy almost 3/4 that of the United States. We would cover 1/8 of the world's land surface. In the list of countries with the largest mineral resources and raw materials and rare earths, which is going to be so vital for success in the 21st century, Canada and Australia always come up in the top 10. In fact, they are such natural geopolitical partners to actually the extent is extraordinary. The Economist magazine has already coined the neologism Ozanada, because they have so much in common. They've got world-class universities, as of course of the other two CANZUK countries, strong research institutions that are set to master generative AI. We English-speaking parts of the Anglo family of nations, that's the way we should think of ourselves, must federate. Not, and this is a very important aspect, not just for greatness, but for our own defence, especially with China's attack on Canada and Australia, which has been utterly relentless over the years. Canada has been the victim of unfair trade practices from China, espionage, intimidation, interference in the 2019 and the 2021 elections. Only 14% of Canadians look at China favourably now because of the way that they've been treated. When Australia asked for an investigation into COVID, China immediately targeted Australian trade, particularly beef, barley, lobsters and coal. It was essentially de facto economic sanctions. And then it presented Australia with its famous list of 14 spurious grievances. Then in November 1990, the Chinese Foreign Ministry tweeted a photograph of an Australian soldier holding a bloodied knife to the throat of an Afghan child. In July 2021, Chinese warships came close to Australian waters during an exercise. All this bullying, and that's essentially what it is. Bullying of Australia and also of Canada would quickly end if CANZUK became the world's next great power. In the great international issues of the future, AI, information protocols, nuclear proliferation, climate change, international terrorism, you know them, they're all there. CANZUK's voice would have to be heard, and heard in a way that the individual nations are not. Together, we would be a geostrategic world power. Separately, we're at the mercy of a purely transactional state like America is today, sadly, or actively malicious ones like the China, Russia, Iran axis, or sclerotic, declining, undemocratic, false friends like the European Union. By the way, mention of Iran prompts me to say that I hope that the god of battles continues to watch over the brave bomber pilots of the IDF who night after night are risking their lives to ensure that the world becomes a safer place, protected from the nightmare of a nuclear-armed mullahs of Tehran. Thank you. The G7 leaders who whine endlessly about de-escalation. Ladies and gentlemen, the best way to de-escalate in the Middle East would be to lift the spectre that has been haunting us for decades of a nuclear Iran. Back in 1947, November 1947 it was, Winston Churchill, had a dream. He was painting. He fell asleep when he was painting while smoking, actually, and the cigar ash dropped out onto his paint palette. And as he was dreaming, he met his father, who had died back in 1895. Over half a century earlier. And they had a conversation, a long conversation, must have gone on for at least 3/4 of an hour if you react it, because he wrote it down, everything that he'd said, with the shade of his late father. And one of the things that Lord Randolph Churchill said was the English-speaking world, and he weighed the phrase, according to Winston Churchill. You mean with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and all that? Yes, said Churchill, all that. Are they still loyal? They are our brothers, replied Churchill. So it was no longer a question of the mother country and the children countries, which was an important aspect of the Victorian way of looking at the empire. Instead, it's a sibling relationship, and that is the one that exists today. It is not mother and children, it is brothers and sisters. That was what happened. That's what the way that people felt in 1947, and I hope also feel today. But then we had Ted Heath in 1973. Then we went down the 47-year cul-de-sac. Then we had the, to me, revolting spectacle of Charles Upham, the New Zealander who won the Victoria Cross and Bar, who was having to wait in line in the foreigners' queue at Heathrow, whilst various other people we fought against, were allowed straight in to this country. As an historian, you'll be expecting me to say something about our common past, an invaluable link between the four countries of our coming CANZUK Federation. And I'd like to do that. Because at the Battle of Menin Road Bridge on the 20th of September 1917, the Australians under General Plumer gave the Germans a severe hammering in Plumer's step-by-step bite and hold battle. 2 Australian divisions were in his absolute central force for that key battle. And shortly afterwards, on the 4th of October 1917, the New Zealand division carried out a very successful attack in the Battle of Broodseinde, and in 1918 famously stormed the walls of Le Quesnoy using scaling ladders. Canadians in the Second World War won the battles of Cesena and Coriano in Italy, and after landing at Juno Beach, of course, on the 6th of June 1944, helped drive out the Germans out of Normandy and cleared the entire Channel coast and took all of its ports. The Australians and New Zealanders were important parts of Auchinleck's 8th Army that fought Rommel to a standstill in the First Battle of El Alamein, which Rommel later admitted convinced him that he'd failed to break through to Cairo and the Suez Canal. One always hears about when one thinks about the Battle of El Alamein, it's always the Second Battle of El Alamein, but one must never forget that back in July and early August, you have the First Battle of El Alamein, which is an absolutely essential part in stopping the Germans from taking Egypt. So in 2 world wars and in countless peacemaking missions in the post-World War. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the ties that bind. CANZUK today needs to come together with new free trade agreements, enhanced migration arrangements as well, especially of young people between our four countries. Intimately, we really need intimately closer defence and security pacts. At the moment, there's a 15% cap on Commonwealth soldiers fighting in the British Army, serving in the British Army. We need to scrap that. We need to integrate all four of the fighting forces as closely as we possibly can. Because this is a historical development. This is something that is not just of today. This is something that goes back centuries. In 1707, England and Wales, which of course had been together for centuries before that, came together with Scotland. In 1801, Ireland was included. Between 1801 and 1922, when Ireland decided to go it alone, Britain expanded globally and Canada became independent in 1867, Australia in 1901 and New Zealand in 1947. After an extraordinary global series of successes, and they all prospered separately. But today, in the much more uncertain world of the 2020s, with the US no longer sticking, no longer abiding by its own post-1945 global settlement, our national destinies need to move onto their next logical stage to full federation of the four CANZUK countries, with further consideration also of other English-speaking countries, such as those in the West Indies, and also, were we fortunate enough to bring them on board, Singapore as well. It mustn't just stop with the four of us, it can go on. The English-speaking peoples are a much wider, much more impressive group than just the four CANZUK countries. And we saw what happened when the Irish Free State decided to leave the family of British nations in 1922. Within 2 decades, it was reduced to the moral degradation of refusing to take its rightful stand in the crusade against Nazism, the most evil threat to civilization in the history of mankind. Even today, it adopts a craven neutrality rather than the courageous stance adopted by the rest of the British family of nations against fascism and racism. Canada and Australia each have expeditionary style forces, armies essentially, of about 90,000, including reservists, which train similarly. Canada's Communications Security Establishment and the Australian Signals Directorate are both vital to the Five Eyes and coordinate closely together. Indeed, the Jindalee Operation Radio Network, JORN, the over-the-horizon radio network operated by the Royal Australian Air Force, can cover 14,000 square miles. And its sale to Canada is the largest defence export in the whole of Australian history, hugely increasing early warning detection systems in the Arctic for Canada. And not just for Canada, of course, also for America. So ignore those semi-threats that President Trump was making with regard to Golden Dome not covering Canada. The fact is, of course it will, because Canada is doing its bit for America too. So what connects us, ladies and gentlemen, is far greater than just the past. There was an historian, I never denigrate that aspect of our commonality. We have similar cultures, as Andrew so eloquently pointed out just now. We have similar legal codes. We have similar assumptions, overlapping networks of trust between businessmen. We have similar views regarding the boundaries between the state and the individual, similar beliefs in free speech, although occasionally these last, I'm afraid, are getting frayed at the edges and need to be robustly defended. We also have, and this is crucial, even in the 21st century, when we think of ourselves as so modern and so almost postmodern, nonetheless, the fact that we have the same monarch as our head of state is also absolutely essential to this. Just the other day, Prince William, I saw an article in the paper about Prince William going to a RAF base, and he was talking to an 8-year-old boy who was the son of an RAF mechanic. And he said to that boy, you know your father does a very important job. And I thought to myself, how amazing it would be. You're 8 years old, Prince of Wales says to you that your dad does an very important job. How great is that for the family, for his pride in his father, for his father's pride? There's something really impossible to take it. Can you imagine? It's not the same for some elected British president to say that to someone. If that comes from the Prince of Wales, from the future king, it means something that will stay with you for life. And we are very, very fortunate to have the royal family to be able to say such things to people and for it to mean what it does. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as well as a glorious past, the 4 countries of CANZUK have, I believe, a very, very glorious future, if only we federate. In the words of Winston Churchill, let us go forward together. Thank you very much. We've got some time for questions and answers, and I wonder whether anybody would like to